Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Grant, and I represent the City and County of Broomfield, and I'm the chair of the DRCOG Transportation Advisory Committee. I call to order the January 27th, 2025 DRCOG TAC meeting at 1:30 p.m. This is an in-person live stream meeting format, and members of the public attending by Zoom have the ability to mute and unmute themselves and share their webcam. For those attending online, please make sure that you've typed your name and it reflects your first and last name and your representation. We ask that those intending to speak use the raise hand button to ask a question or comment on an agenda item. If you have any technical questions, you can direct them to staff in the chat box. As a reminder to members and alternates here in person, please press the unmute button on the bottom of your mic stand and be sure that the light on the microphone is on and you're prepared to speak. Speak directly into the microphone so your voice will amplify. Please announce your name and representation when asking a question or making a comment for the record. During the business agenda, TAC members and alternates can speak or ask questions. Members of the public may speak during public comment. DRCOG is sending around the sign-in sheet. Please do sign in. And at this time, TAC members and alternates will introduce themselves for those that are here in person. Sorry.
Good afternoon, Jessica Mickelbust, CDOT.
Maria DeAndre, City of Wheat Ridge.
Christina Lane, Jefferson County.
Mike Whitaker, City of Lakewood and Jefferson County.
Jean Sampson, City of Boulder.
Art Griffith with Douglas County.
Kevin Ash, Weld County, Town of Meade.
Chris Quinn with RTD.
Kent Mormon with Adams County, City of Thornton.
Good afternoon, all. Matt Callison, Arapahoe County, City of Aurora.
Good afternoon, Angie Rivetta, Malpieti, Special Equity Seat.
Jeff Boyd, Housing Special Interest.
Michelle Riccio, Adams County.
Jenna Hahn, Adams County and City of Commerce City.
Cam Kennedy, DRCOG staff.
Sarah Grant, City and County of Broomfield.
Jacob Rieger, DRCOG staff.
John Papsdorf, DRCOG.
Brad Rivera, non-motorized special interest.
Jim Houston, CDOT Region 4.
David Kretzinger, City and County of Denver.
Marissa Gahan, CDOT Division of Transportation Development.
Kira Rimmon-Moore, Regional Air Quality Council.
Tom Rife, Town of Castle Rock, Douglas County.
Justin Schmidt, City of Lone Tree, Douglas County.
Sal Molinakis, City of Lafayette, Boulder County.
Jonathan Webster, City and County of Denver.
Alex Hyderite, Boulder County.
Carolyn Clam, DRCOG staff.
Jim Kotzer, Arapahoe County.
Jennifer Bartlett, City and County of Denver.
Thank you. At this time, I'll hand it over to Jacob Rieger for an announcement.
Thank you, Chair Grant. One membership update this month, a welcoming or a continuing welcome to Kevin Ash, who's now with the Town of Meade, but remains as Southwest Weld County's member for Transportation Advisory Committee. The former alternate for that position, Elizabeth Relford, is in a new position at the county. So the new alternate is, I think, Evan Pinkham. Yes, thank you. So wanted to note those membership changes and welcome back.
Thank you. We'll now open the meeting for public comment, and public comment is limited to 3 minutes. If you've joined by Zoom, please raise your hand by pressing this raise hand button, and we'll call on you to begin speaking. If you join by phone, please raise your virtual hand by pressing *9, and we'll call on you by the last 3 digits of your phone number. Staff will unmute you, and you will need to unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your phone. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, after which we will ask you to wrap up, and your line will be muted. As a reminder, after public comment, only TAC members and alternates will be able to partake in the discussion regarding each agenda item. At this time, do we have any public comment here in person or online? Seeing none, we will move on with our agenda. At this time, we'll move to look at the December 16th, 2024 TAC meeting summary. This is attachment A in your packet. Is there any discussion, corrections, or questions about the meeting summary? Seeing none, we will move on to our business agenda item. So our first item is an action item. We have 2 today. Action item number 4, amendments to the fiscal year 2024 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program. This is attachment B in your packet. And I'll hand it over to Josh Schwenk, Senior Planner for DRCOG.
All right, thank you, Chair. Scroll down a bit. We just have 3 quick amendments to our Transportation Improvement Program for you this afternoon. The first is to add $8.56 million in state legislative funding to the existing Vasquez Operational Improvements Project. Next, we have a scope change to Superior's McCaslin Boulevard Crossing Project. This would change the scope from design of a bike ped underpass to construction of an at-grade crossing. As this was a sub-regionally selected project, the scope change was approved by the Boulder County Sub-Regional Forum already. And there's no change in funding for that project. Next, we have the addition of some additional state funding for the US 287 Safety Median Project in Boulder County. This includes $4,102,000 in state safety funds and $3,718,000 in state faster funds. So with that, happy to take any questions on these 3 projects. Otherwise, I do have a proposed recommendation available for you.
Thank you, Josh. Are there any questions for DRCOG? None. We do have a motion in front of us available for approval for this agenda item.
I did have just one note.
Sure.
I'm in support of the overall motion, and just note that the Vasquez project will have some railroad coordination, as BNSF is intending to replace signals at the 52nd crossing.
Thank you. I'm sorry, is that also a motion or not? Or just a comment?
Happy to make the motion to move to recommend to the Regional Transportation Committee the attached project amendments to the tip.
Singer, do you have a second? Angie Rivera Malpietti. Motion's a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. And opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is item number 5, 2025 Federal Safety Targets and Adjusted Federal Bridge Condition Targets. This is attachment C in your packet, and this will be presented by Carolyn Clam, Assistant Planner for DRCOG.
Great. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm here to present on federal performance measures and targets, as you wonderfully gave that introduction. So just a quick overview of what the federal performance areas are. There are some dictated by the Federal Highway Administration and some by the Federal Transit Administration, and they're listed here. Today, I will be talking about PM1. So in terms of the safety performance overview, what is this performance measure involve? It involves public roads in the DRCOG MPO region. The data for it is provided by CDOT, and DRCOG does some geolocation and cleaning on that data as well. The performance measures that I'll be going over today are the number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, number of serious injuries, rate of serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, and then non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. The calculation is a 5-year rolling average, and that is given to us by, that methodology is given to us by the federal government. Additionally, the targets are supposed to be realistic, achievable, and not aspirational. And DRCOG can choose to support CDOT state targets or set our own for the region. In our case, we choose to set our own targets for the safety performance measures. Let's see, penalty for not meeting targets. There is no funding penalty or financial restriction, but there is additional scrutiny that comes into the planning process and the federal certification. So the methodology, the first point we have here is that when DRCOG established taking action on Regional Vision Zero, we decided that loss of life is not an acceptable price to pay for mobility. So that factors into what our goals are, which then lead into our targets. So our targets are therefore based on a goal of 0 fatalities and 0 serious injuries in our region. But they also balance that long-range goal of 0, but also the requirement that we're not going to get there tomorrow, right? We have to be realistic. So short-term and realistic targets. So I'm going to show a few graphs like this, so I just want to walk you guys through what we're looking at here. So this is for the people killed in crashes by year. So what we have here is the taking action for Regional Vision Zero was adopted in 2020, and we set our aspirational goal line, which comes out to 13 fewer deaths every year. That's that dark green line down the side there. And then the purple is observed data. And if you'll recall from previous meetings, we have some struggles with getting our data available quickly. So the last available data point we have is 2022. So that's that purple line with the observed data. So in order to make this, there's supposed to be another thing at the bottom, but I'm getting some PowerPoint glitches, so just bear with me. I apologize. So from our observed data, we project 13 fewer deaths, and that's that light purple dot, 13 fewer deaths there, and then 13 fewer deaths. And then we use those 3 projected data points and the 2 previous years, which are observed data points, and we take average of those points, and that's our 5-year rolling average. So that data point is 318, then an observed data point of 351, and then 3 projected data points to calculate our target. So that chart previously showed us how we calculated the 2025 number of fatalities safety target, which is 329 is the new updated target. So similar with serious injuries in crashes by year. Again, we have the average reduction required, which is minus 68 fewer serious injuries every year. And then we have our observed data and then our projected data, which we then take the rolling average of. So that becomes number of serious injuries and our target of 1,846 in 2025. For our non-motorized, again, similar process. And in this case, our target is 435 fewer non-motorized deaths and serious injuries. And we do the same thing for the rate of fatalities and serious injuries, but we include the 100 million vehicle miles traveled, so it's a rate instead of just a total number. So in terms of how we've done on previous targets, we've sort of been off and on in the past few years. In 2022, when we got that data, unfortunately, we did not meet any of our 2022 targets. And then for our 2023 data, I believe we only recently got the updated crash data, so I haven't had the time to go back through and determine whether or not we've met our 2023 data, our 2023 targets, excuse me. So in terms of safety, what are we doing to continue to improve safety in the region and attempt to meet these targets? So the last time we were here going over the federal safety performance measures, we were talking about taking action on Regional Vision Zero update, and that has been accomplished. We were talking about a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant exploration, and the regional grant application was accomplished. We also had been discussing the crash data dashboard, kickoff and implementation. We now have a wonderful crash data dashboard, which you've seen presentations here as well on that. And then the active transportation plan update is currently in progress. So of the things we laid out last time we were here, we've been working on accomplishing them. In terms of ongoing and new work, these are the headers here are the goals from our Taking Action on Regional Vision Zero plan. So we wanted to improve collaboration between allied agencies. So those Regional Vision Zero work group meetings are still happening. we were wanting to increase awareness and adoption of Vision Zero. When requested, we participate in the Colorado Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee. We wanted to design and retrofit roadways to prioritize people's safety. And DRCOG continues to be a voice in multiple local corridor safety studies. Finally, we wanted to, or not finally, additionally, we wanted to increase funding and resources. So DRCOG is working on hiring a second senior safety planner to continue to lead Vision Zero initiatives. DRCOG is supporting locals with SS4A funded development of local safety action plans. And finally, our TIP includes many projects at $434.8 million that will improve safety. And finally, improving data collection and reporting. So DRCOG is launching a permanent crash data consortium in 2025, which will continue to improve data collection and our responsiveness as a region. And yes, continued participation in the Colorado Statewide Traffic Records Advisory Committee, again, continuing to promote safety in the region. So that's what I had for safety. And we are also going to quickly go over, this should not be as much information as the safety was, but PM2, which is, we're looking at bridge condition targets. So again, here are the federal performance areas. This is PM2. Bridge condition falls under the infrastructure condition here. In terms of the bridge condition overview, the targets have to include all bridges on the NHS, including on and off ramps. The data is from the National Bridge Inventory, and our performance measures for the bridges are deck area classified as in good condition and % of bridges classified as poor condition. And again, similar to the safety, the targets need to be realistic and achievable and not wholly aspirational. And again, DRCOG can support CDOT's state targets, or we can set our own for the region. And in this case, DRCOG is following CDOT's targets in the case of bridge condition. And the only one I'm going to be talking about today is this one here, the bridges classified as in good condition. It is the one that CDOT is revising, and we are, well, I'm proposing that we continue to follow their guidance. So here's our bridge condition. The existing target is 36%, which is that dark orange line there. Forgive me, the legend has gotten cut off at the bottom, but I believe DRCOG is the dark green line on top, and statewide is the light green line underneath. And the proposed target is just raising that bar just a little bit, 38.5%, and DRCOG is holding steady above that line. So I don't see any potential issues with that. In terms of our current bridge performance, we have the existing 4-year targets. Again, we're only looking at revising that first one, which is going from 36% to 38.5%. And then the other bridge condition target is bridge deck area rated poor. The current target is 4%, and our revised target has no change. And if you are curious for a little more information about where these bridges are in our region, the map on the left shows bridges in poor condition, and the map on the right is bridges in fair and good condition. So yeah, just to get a sense of where these bridges are and how many more we have that are in fair and good condition than we do that are in poor condition. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, and I have a recommended motion here as well.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for that concise and thorough presentation. Are there any questions or comments for DRCOG? Christina Lane?
Thanks so much for the presentation. Breaking this down, what does it look like in terms of percentage of the volume of bridges? What's like, so going from that 36 to 38%, 38.5%, what's the number of bridges that the expectation is for those to be improved?
I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but I'm happy to look those up. I can go back to this here. Yeah, I mean, we're already holding steady above the line, so I don't think it would provoke us into needing to suddenly repair a ton more bridges. But if anybody else has, at DRCOG has better information, I'm happy to defer to them, and I can get that number and email it to you.
That's coming from really a spot of, I mean, is there any harm in bumping this up to 40 if it looks like we're going to be aligning with at least 40% above that threshold? Just thinking like if we're talking a few bridges a year kind of thing that we can prioritize based off of the data and seeing that, you know, safety of these corridors is getting less hazardous. Is it worth the conversation to bump this up to be a little bit loftier, knowing that we're already kind of in alignment with that?
Yeah, I don't think that's really my call to make, but I'm happy to defer to my supervisor to answer that question.
So for the bridge condition targets, we've historically supported CDOT in theirs. So we are proposing continuing that track. So it is the full state target we're looking at, not just the DRCOG target. We can support the state with funding to bridges in our area, but for these particular federal performance measures, we've relied on the state's number and supported the state's target for those, since while it is a good network on the national highway system, we do not put all of our funding on some of those bridges on the national highway system. So how are we prioritizing some of that limited funding? And so for this case, where we're not too different from the state by these graphs, we have elected to just support the state, and they have initiated the adjustment on their end. So it's really up to us. Do we want to continue supporting the state with their movement, or we could set some of our own for the region, but it's just a trade-off of, with as close as we have been aligning with the state, what makes sense for this particular performance measure.
Thank you.
Ms. Mickelbus, did you have something to add?
Yes. We have a lot of bridges in Region 1. We have 900. I know that the graphic you have also picks up some of the bridges kind of up in Region 4 as well, but just generally in the Region 1 vicinity, we have 900 bridges. I don't know off the top of my head how many of those are in poor condition or fair condition, but it's a certain amount. So I see a lot of value in aligning the numbers together, because I don't know how DRCOG would move ahead with a percentage different than CDOT, because we have a pretty aggressive approach right now to taking care of our poor bridges through many strategic projects. You can see the I-270 corridor on that graphic has several bad bridges. I see the bridge down south that I'm collaborating with Douglas County on, and several of the other bridges kind of out west. So I see a lot of value if we can stay together on those targets and understand why we, you know, let's be like overachievers. But I think we would be really, I'm not sure we'd be able to do that. I think the targets we've set are already really aggressive and already overachieving, given the dollars that we have to put toward bridges. So I don't know if that helps answer your question at all, but I see value in just kind of aligning. It's different than safety, where DRCOG has dollars to really make a difference than CDOT does, but I'm not sure that's the case so much with bridges.
Yeah, thank you for that comment.
Ron Papsdorf?
Yeah, thank you. On Papsdorf with DRCOG, and just to supplement Jessica's point, I think what's really important to think about is that while not all bridges on the NHS system are on the CDOT system, the vast majority are. And CDOT has a state bridge and tunnel enterprise with dedicated funding to bridge improvements. They have a very methodical way to address failing bridges or bridges in poor condition. There's also dedicated federal formula funding that goes to state DOTs for bridge work, both on system and off system. So I think that's why we have tended to recommend that we just follow suit with CDOT's statewide bridge performance measures.
Go ahead.
So switching gears a little, I had a question when we were looking at sort of the Vision Zero numbers. And, you know, I think you explained it, maybe if I just didn't get it fast enough, but if we look at that chart right there, obviously in the future, right, we're making those projected drops, and they're still dropping at that like 13 per year versus a steeper rate, right, which we'd have to get to 2040. And is that because the feds are requiring that to be the limit, or is there some reason why that wasn't like 15 or 17 or something steeper?
I think it's because we've been trying to keep the same methodology over the past few years since setting the target of taking action on Regional Vision Zero, which established that same slope. So even at that current down drop, it would put us at like, you know, you can extrapolate the line, it would put us further down. But we want to keep the same methodology so we can compare from year to year to see if we are improving. And additionally, the data line is, you kind of gonna expect it to jump around because it's real life data. It's gonna not follow a perfect, beautiful slope. And since, you know, COVID was in 2020, we're really kind of starting to see what the data actually looks like post-COVID. So maybe in a few years, once we see what more data is looking like, we would want to reevaluate, but for the time being, just keeping the same methodology.
Thanks.
Further question, Justin. Alex Hyde-Wright?
I had a similar question about the slope of the line, and I would kind of dispute the fact that changing the slope changes the methodology, because as I see it, the methodology is you draw a straight line from the latest observed point and then connect that to zero at 2040, and then you figure out what your annual average reduction needs to be. And so just like the 13 NQS is no longer steep enough to get us to zero by 2040, adjusting the slope of that line keeps the methodology the same, but it needs to be adjusted to 19.5 to get us to our Vision Zero target in 2040.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first year I've done this, and from what I can tell, we established this methodology in 2020, so we didn't draw from the latest observed data, but I'm happy, Alvin, if you want to assist me on this question as well.
I mean, I think part of it is also we're wanting to see the progress we're making. So you do see another line if we were to show that steeper curve with the latest observed data point, but we're losing that goal we set back in 2020. 13 was already a very aggressive number as a region. And so since then, where are we going from this data point? Not the correct direction, but we recognize, especially with serious injuries last year, that the data can jump around between this projected straight line point, and we do want to see a decrease in that data, but we think it's easier, especially with these federal performance measures that are so prescribed in terms of methodology, to continue this straight line trend average reduction across all of the three measures and continue working on our safety targets in other venues like our Taking Action Regional Vision Zero plan, other safety programs we're establishing as an agency.
I'm not seeing the harm in retaining the green line as our previous target and then updating it with another line that becomes our 2025 target line.
Can you repeat that?
Jacob Revere?
Yeah, actually, I'll address that point because it's a valid perspective, Alex and everyone. Just to be really clear, part of this is about our ability to affect change given the federal requirements and given the federal methodology that we have to use to set these targets. Remember, these are very short-term targets. So everything Carolyn is showing you for 2025 target setting is based on the years, the data years of 2020 through 2024. 2020 through 2022 are already known, they're already set. We can't change them, we can't do anything about them. 2023, we just got the data literally, I think, 2 work days ago. So we just came in, which is faster than usual, by the way. But we have that data lag for 23. 2024 obviously just completed, we don't know what's happening there. And then 2025 obviously is our 1 year of sort of predictive. So the point is that just our ability to affect change on these targets is not great. In fact, it's pretty small. Per the federal requirements and per the federal methodology of very short-term targets. So we made this decision back in 2020 to baseline on that year, to look at that trend line to get us to zero by 2040. It will jump around from year to year, but it doesn't change the overall approach. It doesn't change our commitment or the things that we're doing to get there. Changing that line, all it would do is just sort of make it jump up and down from year to year, but it's not a practical change and it doesn't really affect the numbers given the really tight sort of straitjacket methodology in which we operate to do this work.
On Papstar?
Sorry, I'd go even a bit further. Just remember that for these federal targets, there is the method for calculating the target specified in law and regulation. And as Jacob said, we can't deviate that. So we have to use a 5-year rolling average to set the federal standards. I'm with you, Alex. I mean, I look at this graph, and we're heading in the wrong direction. We're not making the progress we need to make, and we need to all work together to redouble our efforts if we're really going to drive down these fatality numbers. The challenge is that when you're looking at sort of 2 years worth of data and then projecting out 3 years and doing this 5-year rolling average, it's really challenging in the near term to sort of see the impacts of the work. And we know that fatalities on the system is a lagging measure. It's not a leading measure, right? So we likely won't see the fruits of our work and our investments and our strategies for some time. So I understand the point, Alex. The challenge is that our hands are tied by federal law and regulation in terms of how we calculate this federal target. It does not mean that we're not committed. And quite frankly, personally, I hate seeing the fact that we're accepting a target, a safety target of over 300 fatalities in our transportation system in a year. Like, that's crazy, right? But again, we've got the method we're provided that, and how we calculate those numbers, but we're not taking our eye off the ball about what we're going to do together to try to drive those numbers down. Hope that helps, Alex.
I think my perspective is that we can still comply with the federal methodology requirement with the 5-year target, but have a line that gets us to our region-adopted target of 2040 by need a steeper line. I'm not seeing the targets.
I think what you're hearing from staff, Alex, is that we don't necessarily disagree with you. The problem is that the crash data is a little bit random. It does move around. And so I think there's not a lot of value in every year or two when we have to update the federal performance measures to then adjust that overriding line.
Any further questions or discussion? Michelle Malinakis.
I have a quick question. There's a bit of ways to show if, I guess, is DRCOG looking into anything if there's just that, whether or not the drop is regular variability in the data, or if it's driven by a project that the region is prioritizing? And is there any intent to kind of look at those projects that we're prioritizing and see what the crash rate is before and after on those?
That is a great question. Let me try to at least start an answer to that. No single project is going to move these sort of regional or even statewide numbers, but in our case, regional numbers. But absolutely, in terms of both our short-term planning through our transportation improvement program, through our long-term planning of the regional transportation plan, through our other modal-based planning efforts and our mode-based plans, which is easy for me to say, absolutely, that consideration of how will these investments, how will these priorities, how will these projects, and how will these dollars allocated affect safety, that is front and center in our work, and I want to reassure that that is the case. It is hard to see that. The analogy that I use is sort of like reviewing a restaurant before it's even opened, right? That's hard to do. So yes, I think in concept the answer is yes. I think it's hard on a year-to-year basis to attribute these inherent variability in the numbers to any particular sort of thing. We can postulate certain trends or certain things, but it's hard to say, well, it was because of this media campaign or this particular project or this particular sort of macroeconomic situation. Again, we can have theories, but it's hard to attribute on an annual basis. But over time, that is the framework that we want to get to. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Mike Whitaker.
Is there a date that this has to be completed by? Because 60% of our numbers are guesses right now, which seems to be a very large amount. I'd much rather wait until the numbers were better and be able to process if we have the time. Going with that, I can tell you 23 was a significant increase in fatalities in Lakewood. 24, we had an additional one, so we're still going up, even though our severe injuries and our total crashes are probably 30% less. Everything's going the right way other than fatalities.
To answer your question about the deadline, I believe that there is a deadline to report these. I just tried to pull it up and I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's in, I think for the bridge performance, it's either next month or the month after that. So pretty quick turnaround. And I don't recall what the safety one is, but we have to do this annually, so I would imagine it's similar.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, at least for the safety targets, it is an annual target setting exercise that's required by federal law. CDOT has to set targets first, and then the MPO, DRCOG, has 180 days, I believe, from when CDOT sets targets. But bottom line is that typically each year we have until about the end of February in which we need to set these targets. So given that sort of federal regulation and given the federal regulation of how we set the target, given the years that go into the rolling 5-year average, we find ourselves in this position every single year of not having all the data, having to make our best guess, meeting this sort of, set in stone federal deadline. It is difficult. And I want to make a connection to an item that we're having upcoming in this meeting about crash data and the Crash Data Consortium and the 405C grant that we've been working on the last 2 years. One of the objectives of that ongoing effort is to get better data more quickly, not just for this, but in part so that we can have better decision making by having data available more quickly.
Any further questions or discussion? We have a recommended motion provided to us. Justin Schmidt. Justin has made a recommended motion, and second by Art Griffith. Further discussion? Art?
I think Alex brought up a good point about a desired steeper line. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that I thought the board spent a lot of time trying to get Vision 0 by 5. So by maybe showing an asterisk or a dotted line and defining it on a graph of what's desired might help communicate what Alex is thinking, although our trend still is at that slower green line. So wondering that maybe staff would consider improving communication of potential better success. Doesn't change my motion or second.
Art, any further discussion? Alex?
Probably going to run into Robert's Rules of Order error here, but I would like to propose a amendment to the motion to adjust the safety targets such that the 2023 through 2025 targets across the different metrics point to 0 by either 2040 or 2045, depending on the DRCOG board's adopted target.
Alex has made a revised motion. A second?
I guess for a revised motion, I'm more consistent with Art's comment. Some kind of detonation without changing the goal, maybe. But can we put an asterisk or something else?
Jacob?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Grant. Carolyn, could you go back to the fatalities chart that we're all discussing?
Yeah, give me a sec.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so understand and heard about better communication. This is very confusing, so anything that we can do to better communicate this, we're certainly open to. What I want to be clear about is that our board has set a target of 0 fatalities by 2040. We have calibrated our methodology and our trend line to achieve the target of 0 fatalities by 2040. That is what the green line is showing. The green line is a trend line. It is not a target line. It is just the trend line to 2040. So your points have been heard and understood, but let me give you the converse of this situation to make the point. if we had been fortunate enough this year to actually have fatalities, like data known fatalities, come in lower than the green line, then by that logic, we would adjust our green line, which is just a trend line, to actually be less aggressive to still get us there by 2040. And I don't think you'd want us to do that, and we're not proposing to do that. The point is that that reinforces what we're saying. This is going to change from year to year. This year, we are well above the line. We don't like it. We're not happy about it, and I want to be clear about that. No one disagrees with sort of the concept of what we're talking about. We are not happy about where we are, but the point is that the data is going to shift from year to year. There may be times when we're below the green line, but because the green line is a trend line, it's still the stable trend line that gets us to our board's target of 0 fatalities by 2040. So Alex, your amended motion, we're actually doing what you're already suggesting, because this methodology to set these federal short-term targets are still ultimately calibrated on our board's target of 0 fatalities by 2040.
That explains it.
Yeah, so we have an amended motion. Is there?
No, we're not.
We're not. Or is it withdrawn?
No.
We vote on, we have to get a second, yeah.
I was just seeing if, is there a second? Andrew Rivera-Malpiedi seconded. We'll take a vote on the amended proposal, correct? Am I following this correct? So we'll probably have to do a hand raise for the amended motion that has been seconded. All in favor, please raise your hand. One, raise them high. 2, 3. So I think that motion fails. Amendment fails, excuse me. The amendment fails. So if we go back to the original motion of the DRCOG proposed recommendation, and we had a motion and we had a second for that by Art Griffith. All in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes. I'm sorry, do we have any opposed? I'm sorry. We have one. So Alex Hyde-Wright is opposed. Anyone else? Unopposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes as proposed by the recommended motion. Thank you. Thank you for the robust discussion, everybody. Well, that concludes our action items for today. The remaining items are discussion items. This is item number 6 in your packet. Parker Road, Colorado State Highway 83 Multimodal Corridor Study. This is attachment D. Jacob Breer, Multimodal Transportation Planning Manager, will introduce this item.
Yep, thank you, Chair Grant. Yeah, just a brief introduction, mostly to introduce our first speaker on this item, but this is an important multimodal corridor study that has been led by Arapahoe County and CDOT and other stakeholders for the past, I think, year plus. On a really important kind of section of Parker Road, State Highway 83. It is one of those key corridors identified in our fiscally constrained 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, not just for fiscal constraint investment, but specifically it is one of our 11 designated bus rapid transit corridors in the plan. This study was not specifically about BRT. This was a larger, kind of more visionary multimodal corridor study, but this is the first step towards kind of ultimate investment, BRT and otherwise, in this corridor. So this study was very thorough and comprehensive. As it is wrapping up, we thought it was important to bring it to you for an update and a preview of those draft recommendations. So without saying any more and giving any more away, let me turn it over to Jim Kotzer, who is the Transportation Division Manager for Arapahoe County. I think I got it right.
Got it right. Thank you, Jacob. It's good to be with you, and thanks for having us. I'm joined by Stacy Schurer from DEA, so she'll give a bulk of the presentation and answer all your questions. So I want to give a project overview. This is a very important route to the Denver metro area, especially as you go farther into the southeast. There's a lot of historical buildings along it. I'm going to promote 17 Mile House in Arapahoe County as one of those buildings. This has been used for many years and it is very valuable, as I mentioned. It's a 6-mile corridor starting about at Hamden, going all the way to Mississippi. There's studies on the north and south end of this corridor. and most recently completed by Denver on the north. Notice on the south there's Cherry Creek State Park, so there's limitations on what we could do there. This is a state route, so CDOT manages and does most of the maintenance and operations along this highway. As you travel from the south to the north, you run through Aurora, run through City and County of Denver, and then Arapahoe County, and then you end up back in Denver. A lot of different partners and moving pieces. We got a federal project or federal TIP grant for this project, $1.5 million, and we have two other funding partners. I'm counting myself, so Arapahoe County and Aurora. City and County did not participate, even though with funding, even though they've been on our stakeholder team. So the purpose of the improvements along this project, I'm going to highlight a few here in bold, is to improve safety for all users, not just vehicles, but for all users along this corridor, to enhance multimodal connectivity, improve the travel experience for people walking, biking, and using mobility devices and riding transit, along and across Parker Road. As these corridors develop in a city, they become a barrier at times. So we definitely see that along Parker Road. The study was very timely to minimize this as a boundary. Need for improvements need to address safety. So for both vehicular and multimodal crashes and safety concerns, and then also need to improve multimodal connections along this corridor. And then lastly is to improve the multimodal travel experience. Not a surprise, the goals of these improvements needed to encapsulate improving vehicular traffic operations. We're not adding capacity along this corridor, but we wanted traffic operations to improve. Have some projects that do that. We wanted to serve regional mobility and local accessibility for all modes. We have 9 Mile Station along this corridor, which is a very important hub for a lot of people traveling. And then we also wanted to incorporate feedback from the public. So here's some examples or a list of how we engage the public. Our general public included having a virtual town hall on April 2023. We introduced a project, we gathered input from the public and addressed any questions at that time. And then we had a in-person meeting at the Stampede. I didn't see Aurora doing the two-step, but they came and they helped out. And CDOT was there to help us as well. And that was a great turnout. We had a big long map, and we took people's comments right there and worked to address them. We also had a couple community focus groups, and there were some great members, or some very knowledgeable members of the community at these meetings, and they provided a robust conversation. Gathered input from these residents and implemented them into the plan. And then we also had agency coordination. DRCOG sat with us on many of the RTD was along the way, CDOT, of course. And then we had 4 PAC meetings where we included elected officials and other representatives that could steer and we could bring along, knowing that eventually, these projects that we put forward, we're going to need to get funding, and it bring along elected officials in the decision-making process. So that's what we included and had good participation in that process. We also had 7 technical advisory committee meetings, discussing different items. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy.
Thanks, Jim. So the alternative evaluation process was a tiered process with more details as we progressed, and I'm just going to step through them. So starting with level 1 concepts, we had 16 categories, and those were at high level concepts that weren't at exact locations along the corridor. Then we ended up moving into 50 improvement options. So those were location specific, but we could have multiple options, for instance, at one intersection. And so after we went through a level 2 evaluation, we ended up with 36 options being recommended. So out of the 50, we ended up with 36 recommended to be considered for defined and prioritized projects. And then we had 3 options that we determined needed further study. So they may be beneficial for our study's goals, but they need more analysis, more coordination, just really more delving into the details before we could recommend them as a project. And we ended up with 11 options not recommended. So those either had impacts that were too high or benefits that were too low based on our needs and goals. So it still could be a project, a very good project, but based on our needs and goals, they are not recommended. So wanted to talk about the bus rapid transit. So Parker Road has been identified as a BRT corridor by multiple agencies, and it's actually a future BRT along all the way from downtown Denver to 9 Mile Station. And so after we had that in level 1 screening, it passed, but after that level 1 screening, the project team moved the BRT to a recommendation without further evaluation, basically, because there is already slated a future BRT study along the corridor. And so we didn't want to spend the time on this study doing things that that other study will be able to get into. But at the same time, this improvements evaluation considered how those improvement options can impact or benefit the future BRT. So it ended up being an actual separate evaluation criteria as far as if a option would be beneficial to a future BRT or if it would need, for example, to be changed, like in order to have a future BRT. And it'll also be discussed with recommendations in the report and in the implementation plan about how all of the projects moving forward will build towards BRT along the corridor. So taking those options and making them into projects. So we combined them into 16 potential projects. So this was based on location, obviously, like if they're all at one intersection. Also connected elements and operations if they needed to be done together to really optimize benefits. Making sure that we had manageable size as well as logical construction project limits. Tried not to get projects that would be too big and unwieldy for construction or funding. Then we took those projects and we ended up doing an assignment of an overall priority. So we ended up with higher, medium, and less. So first we went through and rated based on purpose and need and goals, which were those things that Jim talked about: safety, multimodal connectivity, and multimodal experience. And then also threw in timing and effectiveness. And that took into consider ease of implementation, traffic operations impacts or benefits, and magnitude of cost. And so we rated the projects with that and then scored them through and came up with higher, medium, and less for each project. And then after that, we came up with potential time frame for construction and implementation. So you'll see that the higher priority projects aren't necessarily all just the short term. They're really 2 different ratings. For us, short term we defined as less than 5 years, midterm is 5 to 10, long term is more than 10 years. And obviously these potential timeframes are can change if there's any change related to cost or that ease of implementation, like a development or something comes in, can move something up on the list. So we also looked at potential funding sources. We did not assign specific sources to the projects because grants and programs, as you guys know, change all the time. They both go away and new funding opportunities come up. And so these are examples, but we will be noting in our implementation plan just the types and categories. So multimodal, safety, those types of things for each of the projects. We also wanted to note that we're advancing design. So we were able to complete the evaluation in under the amount that was funded for the corridor study. And so we're using our remaining contract budget to move a few projects forward. So the agency partners, we all talked about it, and they agreed to move forward with the 4 that you see here. A shared use path along the corridor, Peoria intersection area, and a controlled pedestrian crossing at Mexico and the Florida intersection area. So these 4 areas, we are just moving forward with more analysis or concept layouts that may be able to provide more information on cost and things that can be used in funding applications or other information for agencies to move. I did want to note that the Florida intersection area, Arapahoe County recently was successful for 2 of the DRCOG set-asides program projects, and so that area will be focusing on the intersection, but they do have a project through DRCOG for the Florida Corridor Micromobility Hubs, as well as the Florida Corridor Multimodal Improvements through that area. So looking at projects, priorities and timeframes. So this is a list of the higher priority projects and a brief description. So you'll see there's 6. Remember, these were prioritized based on safety, multimodal connections, and multimodal experience. So you can see that those really relate strongly to those criteria. You'll see that it includes 4 new controlled pedestrian crossings of Parker Road. And those were based on those locations initially when we set those are based on the distance between existing signals that are out there to optimize, try to get those gaps filled. Land use across Parker Road, we have quite a few locations where there's high density residential on one side and a park on the other, as well as observations. We see people out there in the middle of the road trying to cross and dodge. Input from the public and our stakeholders, as well as data that we found where people are crossing. So looking at all of that is where we came up with these locations. You'll also see the other most common recommendations are intersection corridor modifications. So that's where we looked at the intersection corridors. If you remember, Parker Road is on an angle. And so we end up with a lot of intersections that have some angled corners and quite a few, because it's a state highway, quite a few free rights with acceleration lanes. So those intersection corridor modifications looked at tightening up those corners, removing those free rights in order to slow down motorists, increase visibility of pedestrians as they cross, as well as shorten the pedestrian crossing. And so at several intersections, we were able to shorten the pedestrian crossing to a point where we actually got motorist benefits as well at the intersection with changes in. And then we had several locations where we have median added on Parker Road. The medium priority projects, you can see there are 5. The shared use path ended up in that medium priority, but really, and you can see it's short/midterm because it's really felt that could move forward in shorter terms with development or other changes along the corridor or other projects. You know, a lot of the higher priority projects would build that piece within that area. And so it's just, the goal is to have a continuous shared use path detached on both sides of Parker Road. And also that includes the signage and striping for a path through there and driveway improvements to really increase the safety of people walking and biking along Parker Road. And then you can see transit improvements, Mississippi, Dartmouth, Cornell bike lanes, and Peoria there. And then less priority projects, we felt like we had to put this over here. These don't mean, it doesn't mean they're low priority and they're not important, but they're just lesser priority than the others given our goals. The Dayton to Iliff improvements in the northbound I-25 on-ramp what we saw with those are, they're just really the higher cost out of the, all of the projects, and that kind of put them down on the, less priority. And the Hampton off-ramp and Dam and Bond pedestrian improvements, those were pretty small, and so we really had lower benefits with those overall. They were tightening up a couple of the intersections about it. And the corridor EV charging stations is really, we showed 4 locations along the corridor with that opportunity, but it's really an opportunity that can be, and the county or other agencies can look at with property owners along the corridor. So next steps, we're going to be documenting these priorities and timeframes and an implementation plan. We're going to have a project report on the webpage and do stakeholder presentations like this, and continue to advance the analysis on those 4 locations, and hopefully provide information that a lot of these projects can get some funding and move forward. But we feel like this will be a great guide for moving forward with projects, both for funding and implementation.
Well, that concludes our presentation. Do you have any questions for us?
Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing us this update on the Parker Road corridor, this TIP-funded project. Are there any questions about the recommendations for the project team? Jessica Mickelbest.
Thank you for the presentation. Quick question on your higher priority and a couple of the medium priority. I see raised medians, which starts to restrict, business owners' access and how they utilize the corridor, how their customers access their business. Did you socialize that idea with those particular business owners, or is that a next step?
That's the next step. We did have those on our open public meeting graphics and online, all of that. And we did get a few of the business owners into our focus groups. However, because there's no funding for that, we did not go out and get people, that's the first thing they'd want to know is, when is this going to happen? And that really is unknown at this point. But there are a couple places where redevelopment is happening, and so the agencies are using that in order to see and talk to, the new property owners at that point. Yes.
Yeah, maybe Jim and I can flag that for, definitely want to have those conversations individually. There's a lot of sensitivity around raised medians for businesses.
Very good. Yeah, there was on the corner of Mississippi and Parker, a development coming in, and we're going to restrict some access. I'll be talking about that one exactly.
David Kretzinger.
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned in your earlier comments that you'd given some thought to the interaction with maybe future bus enhancements or BRT. Could you just restate briefly the higher priority projects, any interactions that you would see with the BRT, whether we need to take things out in the future or modify them? Thank you.
Yes, so the biggest place that we saw the interaction are the ones that were actually not recommended. Just to let you know, we were looking at some that there's long continuous acceleration lanes on Parker Road right now that we talked about in level 2, either striping them out or pulling in the curb. And felt like that would be a modification that could, be something that BRT would limit BRT in the future. And so that was one reason why we did not recommend those moving forward. However, so all of these, you can't see them because it's the list, but all of the bus stops that are around these intersections, we went through and noted improvements for them. Some are shifted, and some are just improved. We added a couple with the transit improvements that we would do if they were at the intersections that you see here. And so we would think that those would be designed in a way to help with BRT implementation in the future. Also, the transit improvements included transit signal priority and things like that. But really noting that getting a robust walking and biking environment along the corridor will really help to get that momentum for BRT as well.
On Papstor?
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to participate in the effort. I think it's really positive effort for this corridor. Look forward to the sort of next steps, looking at larger transit investments and exploring BRT more specifically. Jessica, your point's spot on, right? There is an important conversation to be had with property owners around access, but tying it to sort of the previous conversation around safety and our efforts to drive down fatalities and serious crashes on the transportation system. There are trade-offs, and raised medians are a proven countermeasure to drive down fatalities and serious crashes on our transportation system. They can moderate speeds, they provide a safer place for pedestrians to cross busy streets, and they reduce conflict points between vehicles. So it's how do we have that conversation in a way that acknowledges and respects the need for access to property, but also doesn't sacrifice our safety needs and our need to drive down crashes and fatalities on the system, and finding ways to balance those without just defaulting to, well, if it's going to eliminate or reduce somebody's access, then we're not going to do it. And I know that's not what you were advocating. I just want to know, absolutely not. And I'm not suggesting you said that, but it's important for you all as local jurisdiction staff that are dealing with your property owners, with your communities, talk about that and reinforce the reason we don't propose things like medians to hurt businesses or property owners. There's a very real reason to do it, and finding a way to work with them and bring them into those conversations to find solutions to the safety crisis that we're facing. I call it a crisis. In a reasonable way, I think the important part of the conversation. Thanks for raising that.
Callison?
Thank you. I want to give a shout out. We appreciate the county's effort and DEA, very effective and robust engagement by all the stakeholders throughout the corridor. It really brought to light a lot of short-term, as Stacey indicated, projects and keeping it up on the BRT realm for a future corridor, which may be coming, a more comprehensive corridor may be coming before a body preliminary funding on. And a shout out, appreciate it. Thank you.
Jessica Mickelbest?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. You just said it much more eloquently than I did, but I agree with you. So with bus and rapid transit, just maybe we pin this to the board, but Denver has the Spear and Leetsdale BRT study that was done, I feel like 2012. I worked on it eons ago. So knowing that BRT crosses jurisdictions, let's just maybe regroup on how, so we don't have two different studies on the same corridor recommending maybe different things, but maybe we think about, as this BRT corridor study is moving forward, do we reopen the Denver one? But maybe just some thoughts around, so they're not segmented just based on jurisdictional boundaries. And I don't know how much, it sounds like you guys kind of just tabled this one, but really being thoughtful about not having two studies, or where do the studies overlap, or how do they engage? And then kind of weighing, before the investments are made on some of these alternatives, making sure that they're also conducive to the BRT improvements you could make along the corridor as well. So just wanted to flag that, because I remember working on the Spear-Leetsdale study a long time ago, and I don't know if it's just been shelved. I know it's still on the website. But before we just pick up and move kind of this segmental study ahead with that one kind of sitting. So probably something to just maybe brainstorm, or maybe you already probably have.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. To quickly respond to your really important point. First of all, the study is still there. I looked at it on Friday, actually. And the reason I looked at it on Friday, I don't want to get ahead in our agenda. I'm going to talk about this more at the end of the agenda when we get to the grant information forms. But Several folks are tentatively looking at this court order to take it forward. So let me leave it there for now. But your point about cross-jurisdictional coordination is well taken.
Justin Schmitz.
Yeah, I think, thanks for the presentation. And one thing on your high priority list, right, I did see a lot of pedestrian crossings, and I think that makes a lot of sense, having spent some time on that corridor, especially at Mississippi, and a bike detour that was incredibly challenging through that area. Each of those intersections has a lot of conflict, so I really applaud the team for looking at alternative ways to get people across that corridor and finding some locations that might work, because I think that has a lot of challenge on that corridor, but getting the pedestrians across that corridor has always kind of historically been, in my opinion, the biggest one. So I think that's a really good high priority list you guys came up with.
Thanks. Yeah, this was a contentious issue when we met with the public, because people are driving 70 miles an hour down this road, and how are we going to cross safely? So we'll make sure our design incorporates those safety elements. Open spaces are a department of the county. They're building a park across from high density development, and we're excited to move forward one of these projects, Mexico crossing near Mexico, to accommodate that park build.
Look forward to that ribbon cutting. So sounds good.
Thanks for the comments.
More questions or comments? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing us the update on Parker Road. Next discussion item on the agenda is item number 7, crash data process. This is attachment E in your packet. Eric Rotten, Senior Safety Planner for DRCOG, will present this item.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Eric Brodden, Senior Safety Planner at DRCOG. Appreciate all the thoughtful discussion we've had already today on safety and the previous presentation. I was here last month to talk about an update for the Crash Data Consortium, and was sort of asked to get into a little bit of the crash data process. Some questions were generated from that, and so I'm going to talk today about 2 main aspects of it, about the data collection and data processing, talking about some of the general steps and some of the challenges we've heard on both of those. And I'll briefly share a little bit of a crash data model that we've created as a link to it in the online version of the packet for everybody to peruse, and talk about some of the next steps that are being done in the region and at the state level to improve this. So starting with crash data collection, first I want to start with 2 things here. One is that when we do talk about crashes and crash data, we are talking about people and communities who are affected, so I always want to highlight that. And also when it comes to the crash data collected by law enforcement, while the crash data they collect is critically important to the projects that we work on and public health works on, it's not exactly the first priority of law enforcement when they're responding on scene, nor should it be. They're there to respond to it, make sure that people who are involved are safe. If they're not safe, to get emergency services for them, to clear the scene so that crashes don't turn into larger crashes. Just want to make that point right front and center. As it comes to the collection, when they are gathering information, there's a standard form that the state has created that law enforcement agencies are required to complete for crashes that fit under the definition of a crash. And they're required to submit that within 5 days of the conclusion of the investigation. It doesn't necessarily mean that 5 days from the day of the crash, but the investigation. So if it's a minor crash, a fender bender, that can probably be done same day. Oftentimes, more serious crashes can take longer as investigations take longer. While there is the standard form, there are different ways that it is used. Different law enforcement agencies use different software. Some are still using paper copies and scanning them and sending them to the state to then code. And there are different policies between departments on in what ways they're filled out. So as far as some of the general steps for the data collection element, first and foremost, again, is going to be the law enforcement response. Clearing the scene, making sure that people who need medical services get those services, and then they start the investigation. This doesn't mean that this can take up to, it could be, again, a day, or it could be months, depending on the severity of a crash. They complete this form, and there's often supplemental information they may have at their jurisdiction level, but the form is completed and sent from the investigating officer to a supervisor, who's simply going to check it for completeness. Not necessarily for factuality, because they're not there, they don't know, but making sure that things are as complete as possible. This is then submitted to the Department of Revenue. So the Department of Revenue is the custodian of record in the state of Colorado, and they have a role where they will they've gathered the data, they check the data to make sure that the required fields are there, and if there are required fields that aren't filled out, they will return those to the law enforcement agency to complete. So the law enforcement agency is then meant to submit an amended report, which will go to DOR. They'll check through that, and the official record is then maintained in the system that the acronym of DRIVES. So the Driver License Record Identification and Vehicle Enterprise Solutions System. Some challenges that we hear about from the Crash Safety Consortium with, sure.
Eric, I'm sorry, can you go back to that last slide? The lower left side, am I reading that correctly, that the Department of Revenue reviews electronically received reports and then manually inputs paper reports? Or, so there are still paper reports that are submitted. They're not all electronic. I just want to understand. Do you have a sense for what that share is?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but most of them are going in through a records management system. So most I think it's something like 90% of agencies or 90% of records. So it's, the majority of them are going in through these automated systems, but they do receive batches from local governments of crashes that some of their coders need to type in and input, data entry, right? And that can introduce errors. So it's a good segue there. So one of the things that we've heard from stakeholders in the crash consortium process have been errors that observed, data that is just missing, that is not collected, so inconsistencies in some of the certain fields and the way that they're completed. And these can apply to all sorts of things, but they largely affect the location. That's one thing we heard a lot from stakeholders of this process. And another aspect is the underreporting of data, and that's either impairment, or when it comes to impairments, as well as those involved in non-motorist crashes. When it comes to location difficulty, there's a couple of ways that location is supposed to be recorded or collected by law enforcement. Ideally, two of these three is what they're looking for. So latitude, longitude, intersection, and then the distance away from that, or if it's on a highway system, if there's a route number available and a mile point. What we have seen observed, though, sometimes is putting an address or a block, which kind of makes sense if you're maybe in a rush. I can see how that could work, but when then it's put into a geocoding system, it doesn't produce very good results. An example might be our building here. If there's a crash down Arapahoe, or 17th and Arapahoe, there's a crash 100 feet down the road, it could be recorded as, 17th, Arapahoe, 100 feet north or south, whatever direction. That's a much better tool to determine a location for a crash as opposed to 1001 17th Street, Denver. That doesn't really mean much for geocoding purposes. It could be anywhere on this block. And so that's something that we've heard and seen. But good news is this is decreasing in frequency in the data. Impairments is something that's been brought up to Dr. Kai's attention, and there's a lot of work going on in the state around this, in that there's an underreporting that's been observed in the data. There's a couple of reasons that we have heard of this and are investigating, including there can be a hesitancy. We've heard from officers to write down if there's impairment suspected, particularly if they're not sure that they would be able to prove that or if a charge could be brought for that. That's not what's meant by the form, though. So that's something that the state's working on and doing some training and outreach to try to amend that. If there's a crash and the individuals are unfortunately deceased on scene, there's not going to be a blood draw from the law enforcement or anybody on that, of course. If someone is injured in a crash and then transported to a hospital is likely to test for drugs and alcohol, but they're checking for drug interactions. They're trying to treat the patient. They're not doing that to collect data, to share data with law enforcement or with the state. And if someone, again, does unfortunately pass away as a result of a crash, an autopsy or is performed or a medical examiner coroner is involved, they will get that information. Depending on their level of coordination with law enforcement or others in their state government or county government structure, that information is probably shared. That's given to CDOT through one process that goes to National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, but it doesn't always then be reflected in the crash data as an amended report that goes to CDOT, that gets updated into the CDOT data, which turns into other data. And one last point on the reporting of data, we've heard from, in the case of non-motorist crashes in some categories, when there might be occasions, I've seen this myself, where you might have a motor vehicle and a pedestrian or a bicyclist who there's a crash and they walk it off. They don't feel it's a big deal. They don't call the police. There's no report that a crash happened in this intersection or roadway. And this could be especially problematic if the person, maybe the vulnerable road user, felt fine after the crash because of a surge of adrenaline, and then 4 hours later, a couple hours later, that wears off, the shock wears off, and they might want to report to a hospital. The hospital's going to have a record of that, but there's not going to be a corresponding record of an injury crash because of that. And as far as another unreporting, this is kind of structural to how the crash reports system is in the state, but if there's no motor vehicle involved, it's not technically really considered a crash. And so if there's two bicyclists or an e-bike or whatever on a roadway, that still could be a crash. It still could indicate a potential safety risk, something that we want to keep track of and add to the aggregate crash data, but it's not going to lead to a police report being generated through the same process and going through the whole thing to the state. So that's a lot for the collection. On the processing side, once the Department of Revenue has the data in Drive, this is then shared out with other state agencies through this system called BEST, the Behavioral and Engineering Safety Data for Transportation. This is principally, I believe, used by CDOT, but I believe CDPHE, Department of Public Health and Environment, also has some limited access to it. And this is really where CDOT's coders go in and they do things like geocoding the on-system crashes that are happening on the highway system, geocoding fatal and serious injury crashes, looking at the factors that happened within the crash as reported on the data to determine the crash type that can be used for analysis, going in and checking to see what is still missing in the data. And CDOT is actually, I really want to call them, shout them out. They're doing a great job, I think, of reaching out to law enforcement agencies when they're identifying things and working directly with them to, when there are gaps in the data, to try to rectify that. Once they have their data sets more or less complete, though, they do compile this into a yearly set that local governments and metropolitan planning organizations are able to request data for. We do this on an annual basis at DRCOG, and our GIS team spends time geocoding all the records, so not just the highways, but all the records we have for our region, as well as then double checking, hand checking all records that we consider high priority, and those are all fatal, serious injury, and bicyclist, pedestrian, and motorcycle crashes. And we consider these are high priority because they're overrepresented in the number of fatalities and serious injuries as opposed to their mode share. DRCOG will then publish this data set. Traditionally, we published it as a geospatial, like a GIS file, geospatial information systems file that you could put in ArcGIS Pro or QGIS, something like that, which if you have those technical skills and the software is great. It's not necessarily something that the average person who doesn't have training on it might find useful. But so we have created our DRCOG Crash Security Dashboard, which I know that we've talked about with this group, as well as the data tool, which was rolled out a few years ago to help inform the TIP process. When it comes to the data processing, there's also some challenges that come from this. There's always the potential for data to be lost as it's going between systems. And again, I really want to call out or shout out the work that CDOT's been doing on this front to really look into this, working with Department of Revenue, working with local law enforcement agencies and Colorado State Patrol to help fix some of these. Some examples of these would be if a software a law enforcement agency is using as, this is a little bit technical, I'm trying not to make it too technical, but if there's a data type in one system that's a text value, and the system at the state is expecting it as a number, and even that can be broken down into, is it expecting an integer or maybe a value set that has decimal points. If they don't line up the way they cross, they could sometimes come across as just a null value. And there's no real way to know is that actually a null value, or was there data that was missing until you go back and check with the agency. And I just know that CDOT has done a lot of work on safety data in some instances where some law enforcement agencies were, it's getting to CDOT or DOR and then DOR to CDOT, showing no record, no information for seatbelts, helmets, et cetera, child restraints for years. And they look into it and, they have that. They have all that data. And so there was a transmission issue there. So things like that, or with latitude longitude, if the state is expecting it as a decimal degree, so a string of numbers versus degrees, seconds, minutes, which is an older system. So if an agency is reporting like that, it's not going to come across correctly. And similarly, other things with just fields that might sound similar in how a law enforcement agency is reporting versus what the state's expecting, this is misalignments. And again, they've been working on addressing these. Another challenge in processing can just be coming from the geoprocessing and the geocoding. Again, with an example of if you just give an address like 1001 17th Street, that's not going to give you really useful information for this sort of purpose. And even if you have a good address or a good location, there can still be issues. And so that's why we do the final check through for those high priority records to make sure that even if something is geocoded, it's geocoding correctly. And finally, just looking at how data can be coded incorrectly, or we can be missing substantial amounts of data, again, through errors introduced through when it's initially collected by law enforcement or when it's entered by analysts or coders at the state at different levels, or at DRCOG or at local governments. So there's potential throughout the system, but there's folks who are working on all this at all the levels to address that. I'm going to share I have a flow chart that we created, kind of a data model that demonstrates a lot of the various ways crash data flows through the system. And let me go ahead. Hope it's legible here. And as stated, there's a link to this on the digital packet. This was originally designed as an 11 by 17 graphic, so it wasn't possible to put that in the 11 by 8.5 packet for y'all today. But just kind of showing, again, some of the various ways that can go. There's the general path of the crash, to dispatch, to law enforcement, to the report. Police will maintain their own records. They'll send the report to the Department of Revenue, which will create their record. But again, if there's an issue, it'll go back to law enforcement. Data can go from the Department of Revenue to the Department of Transportation. They do their work with it. We are able to access that as an MPO. Local governments can access that. That data is sometimes then shared with consultants or used through different software systems. And there are even instances where local governments will, I won't say totally issue, but will go straight to their law enforcement agency and get access to records. There's not necessarily one's better than the other. There's different advantages to each one, and different ways to, as they go through the system, they get more refined. So there might be issues with certain law enforcement records that have been solved or addressed through processing at DOR, CDOT, and DRCOG, but they all kind of add different levels of information. And so just a quick representation of, again, the many ways that it can flow. Doesn't necessarily go this way every time, but just the ways that data is being used and accessed in our region.
There will be a quiz on this at the end of this item.
And just kind of next steps that we are working on, we're continuing the work of the Crash Safety Consortium. As mentioned earlier, we have our next meeting on February 20th. It'll be in person in this room. We'll be looking at the final report that was published last year and prioritizing strategies from that. I was a little conservative with this next bullet point, but as Jacob mentioned, our crash data is available, or as Kellen mentioned, crash data is available now. And we have already updated the crash data dashboard as well. So that now reflects the years from 2019 through 2023. And we're also participating in a subcommittee of the Colorado Task Force on Drunk and Impaired Driving, which is working on addressing some of these data flow challenges between impairment data at medical or coroner's offices, medical examiners, hospital system, and seeing how those can be addressed and get that data into DOR and CDOT systems to have more accurate data out here for everybody wanting to use it. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for the overview. Any questions or comments for Dr. Cog? Jessica Mickelbest.
Thank you. It's a good day of presentations. I really appreciate the work you're doing here, and it's fascinating the length of time that it takes. I mean, I can tell you one of the least favorite parts of my job is I get a text message every time there's a fatality on our roadway, like real time, within minutes, sometimes hours. And then to know that you're not getting the information on that for several, maybe a year or more. I think the challenge that we have, particularly back to the prior conversation about meeting our safety goals, the safety targets, is that I can already know where some hot spots are. I already see trends just from my text messages. But then if we're waiting for this process to work through to get a safety improvement scheduled or a safety improvement project going, we're several years away from that safety improvement, and the hot spot could still be there, or it could have totally moved and changed. So just really want to say thank you for sticking with this process and for digging through all of the details, and just applauding, you know, your diligence in navigating the flow, because it's really important work. If we can get to a place where we can save some months, that's a big accomplishment, because that means we're closer to getting some of the improvements out there that I can tell you already, like where I know a few should be, but then you just don't know for so long. So just thanks. I appreciate these updates, and I've really found it fascinating.
Mike Whitaker.
Maybe we can change some arrows. So I find it crazy that you guys are updating data and it doesn't get back to CDOT, doesn't get back to Department of Revenue. So we're going to end up with databases that don't ever agree with each other.
And if again, I will say we do share our data back with CDOT after we get it from them and we geocode it, we do share it back to them. I'm not sure if how up to date they are with backfilling that or what their exact process is with that, but we do provide that back as hopefully able to provide a service to that state too.
On Papsdorf.
Madam Chair, I know we're running a little short on time, and we still have another such an important topic. And I just got everybody really appreciate the complex system. I'm not sure there was any one person that really understood all of the process flows and steps. And now there's a whole group of people that better understand the processes, which is really the first critical step to getting people to acknowledge that there are issues and maybe identify some ways to improve the system. Because to the points that have been raised, we can't make good decisions about where to invest and try to have an impact on reducing crashes unless we have good current data to make those decisions on. So really just appreciate the work, and I know we're going to at it and poking at it. I would encourage everyone, if you're not already involved, if you don't have staff involved, to get involved with the Crash Data Consortium and help us figure out ways to improve this process. Thank you.
I concur with Jessica and Ron. I really appreciate DRCOG's leadership in this area, this very important safety for our region. And I'm really glad to see that there will be a subcommittee on improving traffic data accuracy. I think that'll be really great to see what those findings are, and maybe there will be trainings across the region and the state to help improve that. I will note that City and County of Broomfield is conducting our Transportation Safety Action Plan with Safe Streets and Roads for All funding. And we had done quite a bit of work to scrub our data. And we recently actually had a little workshop with our traffic enforcement team to kind of go through ways that we could improve collecting our data, just many of the reasons that you stated here. So we certainly all don't need to wait until the committee is complete with their work. You can always take action today in your local communities with the safety work that you're doing every day with your team. So thank you. Any further questions or discussion? Okay, thank you, Eric.
Okay, thank you.
Our final discussion item for today is item number 8 in your packet, Advanced Mobility Partnership Annual Update. This is the attachment F in your packet. And this will be presented by Emily Lindsay, Active and Emerging Mobility Program Manager for DRCOG.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have the enviable slot of last discussion items, so bear with me. I'm Emily Lindsay. I manage our Active and Emerging Mobility Program, and I am here just to give you our annual update on the Advanced Mobility Partnership. All right, when I was making this slide deck, I was like, do I need to include this? It's been 5 years, but I do see some new faces, so here we go. The Advanced Mobility Partnership was established just over 5 years ago, really with our partner agencies, CDOT, DRCOG, RTD, the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, to coordinate, collaborate, implement Mobility Choice Blueprint, which was completed in 2019. There's 2 different groups that are associated with the Advanced Mobility Partnership, or AMP, if you've heard that one. We have an executive committee made up of leadership from those partner agencies and a working group. So the working group is made up of a variety of stakeholders in the region. We have folks from member government staff, the private sector, from all of the AMP partner agencies. It really depends on kind of the month. And so we meet every other month really to serve as a place where we convene, to learn, and to discover opportunities to collaborate. So I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we have chatted about over the last year. And they really range from artificial intelligence and camera technology and how those are being deployed and tested in the region. We've talked about digital trip planning and payment, different programs that are happening at the region and the state level. And then we've also talked about things like microtransit, first, last mile, and kind of transit supportive efforts in the region associated with technology implementation or pilot processes. All right, and how does this relate to you all? So typically Carson Priest is here, and I believe he's listening online. So Carson is the best. He represents you all on the TAC at each AMP working group meeting, and he reports back to you. I'm sure you've heard him at the end of the TAC meetings, give a report out on the kind of items that were discussed and what's coming up. So I just want to say thank you to Carson for participating in that role. I do know he's been serving in that role for a couple of years, and if there's anyone else that's interested in either serving kind of as liaison or an alternate, always looking for new folks to join us at the table. And just to give folks an idea of what's happening here in 2025, we're going to keep the same cadence that we had last year, where we meet every other month. It's the first Tuesday of even-numbered months. And so you can see that here. We're happy to add folks to calendar invite or the contact list if you're interested in reviewing agendas, which come out a week prior. We do definitely see different folks tune in to different topics. So it is a great opportunity to learn about a variety of transportation projects in the region. We do bring in out-of-state folks to present on pilots that are exciting from outside the region. Some of the topics for 2015 you can see here, but they really range across the multimodal transportation spectrum. So we're looking forward to 2025. If anybody's interested in joining the group, learning more, certainly reach out. We're always looking for new folks and projects to highlight their exciting work and to listen and learn from folks in the region. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Emily, for the update. Any comments? Well, it seems like that was a very thorough update. Thank you, Emily, for presenting the annual update of the Advanced Mobility Partnership. Thank you. And the final item for today is an informational item in your packet, grant information on a few grants, one being the state, the Community Clean Transportation Assistant Grants Funding Program, also known as CCTAP, federal programs Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, also known as RAISE, and the federal program Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, also known as PROTECT. I'll hand it over to Jacob to talk a little bit about these grant opportunities.
Thank you, Chair Grant. I know it's been a long meeting, but there are a couple highlights here on these different grant programs that we did want to talk about. First, just as a reminder of why we do this, why it's in the packet, we do want to increase regional transparency and coordination. We've been doing this for, I think, a couple years now. Particularly with the bipartisan infrastructure law, discretionary grant programs, of which there are many. We just want the committee to see what folks are thinking about. We want you to see what your neighbors are thinking about in terms of potential grant applications. Particularly if you want a support letter from DRCOG, we do ask that you submit the grant information form. We appreciate all of you who do that. I think we received 3 formally RAISE information forms, one for CCTAP, and I don't think we received any for CCTAP, but I do want to talk about CCTAP in a moment. But first, Ron has a few words to say about what was the RAISE program.
Okay. Thank you, Jake. So the RAISE applications are due this week, Thursday, the 30th of January. I think requests for support letters, which I got to everybody late last week. And then over the weekend, the name of the grant program is now BUILD. It is no longer RAISE. I believe from some guidance that was issued over the weekend on that they'll accept materials that were prepared prior to the name change. I don't think the letters need to be changed to BUILD. They know what the project is and what the support is. If you really, really, really want an updated letter by the 30th that refers to the grant application being for BUILD instead of RAISE, let me know. I'll do my best to get it to you before Thursday. It's a busy week though, so no guarantees. But if you really, really want it, let me know and I'll do my best.
Thanks, Ron. I'll shift gears a second, talking about the CCTAP program, the Community Clean Transportation Assistance Program. You'll recall that Darius Pakbaz from CDOT presented on this notice of funding opportunity at our December meeting. So again, as the NOFO is out there, draft applications are due, I believe, February 25th. Final applications, I believe, are due April 30th or something very close to that. As pertains to our earlier discussion about the Parker Road corridor in particular, I do want to be transparent. DRCOG is talking to some partners. We are considering a potential application for one of the BRT corridors in the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. We are exploring the potential of looking at submitting for an alternatives analysis on the Spear-Leedsdale-Parker corridor. It is a very long, complicated corridor. As defined in the 2050 RTP, it would go from the Colfax and the Colfax BRT all the way down to Interstate 225 at 9 Mile. There's even some interest in looking at this segment of Spear Boulevard, kind of northwest of there, going through downtown Denver, up to I-25, and maybe even up to Federal Boulevard to connect with the Federal Boulevard BRT. So these are ongoing kind of conversations with partners. There has been no commitment yet. We don't want to compete with our local governments per se, but bus rapid transit work, implementation work, is one of the eligible opportunities under the CCTAP NOFO. It's something that we're all very interested in, so I wanted to be transparent that at least those conversations are taking place. And to Jessica's earlier point, that we are looking at that corridor holistically and the constituent studies that have proceeded in that corridor of how we can move that forward. Furthermore, by the way, that corridor, along with 4 others, is part of our Build America Bureau grant, where we will be doing at least some initial work in 5 of those corridors, including the Spear-Leedsdale-Parker corridor. So I just wanted to share that with folks. Thank you, Chair Grant.
Thank you for those updates. Are there any questions or comments for DRCOG about these grant programs? Matt Kelson.
Thank you, Chair. In the spirit of transparency, we were a little bit late getting our RAISE now BUILD grant proposal in, but the city will be submitting a grant request, and that's to fund the Better Montview mobility project, which is in the Fitzsimmons campus, Peoria on the west, and Fitzsimmons Parkway on the east. to build that out, construct it as a complete street. Thank you.
Ron?
Sorry, I shouldn't, thank you, Mac, for the reminder. I should have mentioned that there were, in addition to the ones that are in the printed packet, there were a couple that came in just after when we sent out the agenda packet. So y'all should have gotten a supplement that had, I think, 2 or 3 forms that we did receive before today for the A/build.
Yes, an addendum was posted. Oh, Alex Hyde-Wright.
Alex Hyde-Wright, Boulder County. Just wanted to mention that Boulder County is planning on submitting a form for a CCTAP application for Colorado 119 for a couple different multimodal improvements.
Alex? Else? We'll move on to administrative items. Are there any other member comments or anything that any member would like to bring forward? Alex?
I had a question. What is our process for communicating DRCOG priorities to CDOT for the 10-year plan update? Look, as CDOT is developing the draft list this year.
Alex, you asked a very straightforward, simple question. I'm going to try and give you a concise response. I guess here's the bottom line, and I want to be really clear about this. First, to be very clear, CDOT does great work on the 10-year plan. CDOT is a great partner, so I don't in my comments want to diminish the partnership or the work that CDOT does. But I do want to be very clear that those priorities ultimately will get expressed through, because you're part of the MPO area, through our 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. As you all know, we are starting a major update to that plan that we'll be working on over the next year and a half for adoption in fall of 2026. Particularly as we get into this summer and later this year, we will be starting the thrust of the conversation around investment priorities, candidate projects, all those sorts of building blocks that will work together to create the fiscally constrained plan. Several processes in parallel. One of the parallel processes is that we have been engaged with CDOT, both at headquarters and the 2 regions within the DRCOG MPO area, Region 1 and Region 4, about working together on the 2050 RTP and CDOT's 10-year plan. And under federal law, though we would do it anyway, CDOT is one of the foundational partners, along with RTD, in our coordinated transportation planning process that the MPO leads, generally in our planning process, but specifically to develop the 2050 RTP. So all of that said, at the end of the day, that work will be done through the 2050 RTP, but there will be continuous communication with CDOT and partnership with CDOT and RTD and others in terms of identifying those priorities and how they're expressed both in the 2050 RTP and the 10-year plan update. So Ron, I don't know if you'd want to add to that, but I think that's the most concise answer I can give.
I'm not going to make a comment that it wasn't very concise, but it was accurate and true. And I think we are working through that process, Alex, I think, to figure out. Right now, the region's expression of its priorities that should inform the 10-year plan is the current RTP. That is our collective expression of our priorities on the system. At the same time, the state is working on trying to update their plan, the statewide plan, and their 10-year plan, and we're also starting work on updating our regional transportation or level best to bring those things together so we don't get misaligned. Because in addition to the MPO's regional transportation plan and the priorities, we work together with CDOT and with all of you and with RTD to express in the transportation plan. We also have additional state requirements and federal requirements around air quality and greenhouse gas emission reduction standards that our plan has to meet within the MPO. So that's why it's really important to collaborate and coordinate on those efforts so that we're performing the responsibilities and meeting responsibilities under federal law and state law.
I would like the record to reflect Ron's answer was as long as mine. Alex, with all that, did that help to answer your question? Okay.
Any other comments or other matters from the TAC? Jacob?
Yeah, I didn't want to preempt anyone on the committee, but we have several new staff at DRCOG, but at least for one person who's sitting behind me today, I did want to introduce Steph Perperno, hopefully I got that right, Steph, who is our new planner working on transportation demand management and emerging mobility. She comes to us from the city of Golden. I think it's about her 5th day or so. So just wanted to give a warm welcome to Steph.
Welcome. Any other comments? Will we close?
Sorry, just to prolong things, because I can't stand it. Steph just proves my point about DRCOG. So there are 3 kinds of people in this region: those that have worked for DRCOG, do work for DRCOG, or will work for DRCOG. So Steph just proves my point.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the robust discussion today. If you did not sign in, please do check in at the sign-in table or find DRCOG staff to be sure that you are accounted for and signed in. Thank you for participation. Our next TAC meeting will be February 24th, 2025. We are now adjourned at 3:20 p.m. Thank you.